at your. Thank you. And then you're more than welcome. So, thanks, Gary.
And Lindell has calendars for sale, and there's lots of stuff here for sale. Spend your money wisely.
Okay, so are we ready? Do I need a microphone or are we good? Yeah. Gee, thanks. Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, all that. Oh, yes, sorry. But, and hello to everybody out there. Obviously, we've got a great program tonight. Ben Maletzke's here to talk about the wolf program. He's the statewide wolf specialist for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, which is a long way of saying if it's about our state and about wolves, you know, he's the guy. So we're very pleased to have him here. And let's see, a couple of little things. If you're on Zoom and you have a question during the presentation, please use the chat function, and we'll read those after the program so everybody in the audience can hear as well. And for you folks here, same thing. We'll wait till the end. We can pass the mic around, and then
We can't pass the mic around this time.
oh,
Because our batteries died. So ask a question, I'll repeat it. And for the folks out in Zoom land, and then Ben will answer.
that works. And we're trying to do a lot of things tonight, so let's get busy. Ben Maletzke and the Wolf Program. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not gonna stand up front here because for some reason my computer, I can't get it to mute. So I don't want to listen to myself talk, if you don't mind. I appreciate you being here to listen. But I am the statewide wolf specialist for Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. I've been in this role since 2017. And I basically, my job is to do kind of all the boots on the ground monitoring of wolves. And I work with two other biologists that are wolf biologists as well. And we do all the seasonal counts that we do each winter. We do a census of the population to see how recovery is progressing. And then we also work with the district biologists, the conflict specialists, enforcement officers, management staff to really kind of look at the wolf program and figure out how many wolves are there and how recovery is progressing on the landscape. And so you can see the annual report, it's 2021. So every April, well, we do the winter census starting January 1st. And then we do a count. It takes us about 2 to 3 months to figure out how many wolves we have in the state, where all the packs are, and how many wolves are in each of those packs. And so we compile all that information in the end of March, and then usually the April commission meeting is when we do the update. And so we're kind of far along from when this update came out, but the next update will be out in early April. All right. Sorry, everybody.
It's working. So now, folks out in Zoom, somebody tell us, can you see the screen, wolves in Washington? Anybody?
Yes. Looks great.
All right.
All right.
I think maybe we got that worked out. We have no idea how we fixed it. Actually, I say I didn't do anything.
I don't know that I did either. Thank you for your help. All right. So as it was mentioned,
Pay the audience member here.
right? Exactly. So this is the 2021 update. The 2022 update will be actually out in April. And so I'm gonna just kind of give you an update of where wolves are and how we do this work and how we do the census of this information. But I'm gonna start with the paperwork. Unfortunately, there's always this stuff. And so wolves are actually federally listed in the western 2/3 of Washington. So the North Cascades, South Cascades, Northwest Coast recovery regions are federally listed. The Eastern recovery region, where we are here, is actually federally delisted. But all statewide wolves are listed as endangered species at a state level. So they are still endangered species statewide, but federally they're only listed as endangered species on the western 2/3 of the state. And that was off of court case in February 10th, 2022, they were relisted. So we work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the western 2/3 of Washington to manage wolves, and they kind of call the shots of what we need to do for management. But we still do a lot of the work on the ground to do the census and do all the on the ground counts and things. And so wolves are managed under our Wolf Conservation Management Plan that was adopted in 2011. And that designates 3 recovery regions, which you see on the map here, delineated in the black. And so we have some recovery goals that we want to see within those recovery regions. And we work with tribal management. So in the Pueblo Reservation or Pueblo Confederate to recovery as well. And so our recovery goals that we designate in our plan, we define a pack as 2 or more wolves traveling together in the winter, and a successful breeding pair, which is our metric to recovery goals, is actually an adult male, adult female with at least 2 pups as of December 31st. And so that's why our winter counts start January.
Sure.
Do I need to move the mic? Is that what I'm? I'll try a little bit better. Is that any better for folks?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so those recovery goals are designated in our wolf plan, and that's what we're trying to achieve to get to recovery for Washington. And so now we'll jump into the fun stuff. And so when you look at a year in the life of a wolf or a wolf pack, you know, in January, the pack is fairly cohesive because that's when the pups are adult size and they're all roaming together. They'll maintain and patrol their territory, which is about 280 to 300 square miles. In February, actually Valentine's Day is kind of when we think of the peak of the breeding season for wolves. They breed once a year. And that's typically February 14th is kind of the peak of that, but up before that and beyond it. And then in April, those pups are born at a den. So that den is typically located in between the summer range and the winter range for ungulates. So the deer don't get pushed down to lower elevations in the winter in Washington because of snow loads. And then they move up in April as things go up. Well, the wolves need to kind of be in the middle ground because once they're at a den site, it's tough to move those pups very far. And so they tend to put that den site in the middle of that summer and winter range of ungulates, kind of as you go up the hill as those deer and elk migrate in the state. And then they stay at the den for a couple months, or about a month and a half, maybe 2 months. And then they're weaned, they stop nursing kind of in June, and the pups still aren't big enough to go travel with the pack because they're still pretty little in the summer. And they'll go to a rendezvous, what's called a rendezvous site, and that's where the adults will stash the pups. It's a lot of times a wet meadow or someplace near a water source. But they'll leave an adult or 2 with those pups, and then other adults will go off and travel around that pack territory, patrol that territory, and then they'll come back. They'll actually bring food back to that rendezvous site. And as those pups get bigger in August, September, some of those pups might start traveling with the adults as they can, and they get stronger and bigger. And then usually by October, those pups are traveling with the pack. And then usually by December, those pups, they get really leggy really fast. They don't put on a lot of mass. By that, they're kind of awkward teenagers at that point. Legs and no muscle mass to them, but they can run with the pack. Usually by December. And so that's when we start looking at getting our cameras out to get our counts, because that's when the pack is most cohesive again. and we can actually get a good count throughout the year. And so we'll go up and we'll do some fun stuff to go do these aerial surveys. And this is out of a fixed wing. This is the Teanaway pack. And so you can see right there's 3 wolves. You can see the tracks where they walked. And then we can actually get a count from the air, which is pretty darn cool. And so all the packs that we get a caller out on these animals, we can go in and fly with a helicopter or fly with a plane, and we can get these counts. But for the packs where we don't have collars, we got to do all the work on the ground with snow tracking. So we might be on snowmobiles, cross-country skis, snowshoes, doing all kinds of work to get out there in these areas where we think we have wolves and try and get a count of the number of wolves that we have in that area. And so it's pretty elaborate process to get these collars out. And we put together a pretty cool video in 2020, and I'm hoping this works. So we're going to try showing that video.
Omak, Washington. Automated weather
That's some
observation. 1545 Zulu. Wind 260 at 04. Visibility 3/4. Temperature 01 Celsius. Dew point -01 Celsius.
You guys all set?
Yep, I'm good. 2 buckles.
Coming up, here we go.
A lot of the flying we're doing is it's not anything most people would even conceive of happening.
There she is. Right here.
There. Point.
Right here.
I don't see her.
Okay, 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock?
Right there.
Okay, got her.
We're flying 10 feet off the ground at 30 miles an hour around trees just to get a chance at maybe darting a single animal.
Maybe. Right there. Ah, dart in.
Got it.
Nice job, guys. Nice job.
We virtually had no wolves left in Washington state after 1930. And in the 90s and early 2000s, wolves started to show up in reports occasionally. But in 2008, we were able to confirm our first pack. And then from there, it's been building. So they're coming from British Columbia, they're coming from Idaho, Montana. And part of my job in monitoring the population is seeing where they're recolonizing, what parts of Washington they're showing up, and trying to find them as they get here. Let's see.
We're monitoring wolves a lot of different ways in all these different aspects to answer the same question. How many wolves are there and how's recovery progressing? It might seem simple, but there's a lot going on in that.
Today, we went out on snowmobiles in the Loop Loop Pack territory. We were doing our winter surveys where we try to get a minimum count of the number of wolves in each pack. And so we were looking for tracks and sign of wolves, because that's one of our methods for counting them.
So we got 2 at least going this way. And if you've got a lot of sign and activity, we'll throw up a trail camera there and see when they come back through.
And so we do that first. And if we think wolves are in the area and we think it's a pack of wolves and they may have pups, we'll then try to go in and we'll try to collar one of those adult wolves. And the way we do that is by trapping them in the summer. So we'll go in, we'll set these leg hold traps just like you could probably imagine, except for they have rubber instead of steel where the teeth are.
And you go out and you check traps and you don't catch anything. And you go out and you check more traps and you don't catch anything. They can be incredibly frustrating because wolves are incredibly smart.
And the winter it's a whole different thing.
In the wintertime with a pack with a collar, we can go in and put another collar in or switch those collars out with a helicopter. We'll draw the blood, and we'll put ear tags in, put a microchip in it just like you would microchip a dog. And then we'll collect a tissue sample for DNA, and we'll take all kinds of measurements and we'll fasten that collar on. By having a collar in the pack in the wintertime, we're able to go out and use a fixed wing plane, and we can circle with the plane, locate where that pack is, and we can actually physically count the number of wolves. 1, 2, there's at least 2 straight down.
A large part of our wolf monitoring has been collar-based. So as wolf biologists, we go out and we put radio collars on wolves, and then that information allows us to figure out how many wolves are in packs and kind of what a territory looks like. But as the wolf population grows, we're not able to maintain collars in every pack.
I'm sure this is a GPS collar, right? Yeah.
Every time we put a collar on, you're stressing that animal. You're running a risk of injuring or killing that animal. You're running a risk of injuring or killing yourself if you're flying in a helicopter.
More and more, the more I do it, the more I realize how dangerous it is and kind of what we're risking to do this. And then when you really think about what we're getting kind of in return, what kind of data we're getting, that's kind of when we start thinking about, are there other ways to get this data? Do we need to risk as much to do this?
Collars are a tool, but we're looking at cheaper ways and better ways to constantly refine how we're finding wolves on the landscape.
AudioMoths are a open source, computer chip based listening device. And setting the AudioMoth is simply just putting this little device in a Ziploc bag and stapling it to a tree. We're just listening to the sounds that are out there, and we're using that to tell us how many wolves are in a landscape. That's never been done before, and it's super exciting. You're listening to wolves howl.
I think we gather a lot of this information because people want to know. For the folks that love to see wolves on the landscape, they want to know. For the folks that have livestock and may not love wolves and may not want to have them on the landscape, they still want to know.
These animals are very normal in a lot of ways. So when I say normal, I'm not meaning like they're boring or anything like that, but that, you know, they have no idea that they're controversial and they're just doing regular wolf stuff every day.
I like to say they're just another critter on the landscape, and they're not near the big bad wolf that everybody makes them out, but they're not a saint either, you know. They're right in the middle. And I just wish folks would understand that a little bit more. So.
So we're pretty thankful to be able to have done that. And it just, yeah, it's hard to show flying through trees with a helicopter with just a shot image of a camera, but it can be pretty spooky sometimes. We got really good pilots, and we put our lives in their hands. So in 2021, we were able to capture 17 wolves from 12 different packs. A lot of that from the helicopter, but a lot of it from trapping as well. And then we monitored over the course of the year because some wolves disperse out of state, some wolves die, some collars malfunction, batteries go dead in collars, lots of reasons we stop being able to track certain wolves. And so right now we're currently monitoring 23 wolves after the summer capture season. We actually had 37 collared at the beginning of the summer, or like midsummer. And so we've lost a lot this year, which is kind of a bummer, but we're monitoring wolves from 17 packs right now. And that's about 51% of the known packs, 11% of the known population that we had. So we got quite a pretty significant sample of that population collar. We're trying to get 1 to 2 collars in each of the packs. And so that's hard to maintain over time. For instance, we had the lookout pack in Okanagan County, and we had 3 collars in there back in April, and now we have 0. So just because one went up to Canada, one went to another pack, and then I forget what happened to the third one, but it ended up, I think the collar malfunctioned on us is what happened. And so it can be pretty frustrating. But from all that work and all that information, we've been able to figure out that each of these green polygons is a different pack. And so our packs on average are about 5 animals per pack, but they can range, a pack is 2 animals traveling together all the way up to, we've had 13 wolves in a pack at the end of the year. So that's a big pack, but on average, it's about 4 to 5 wolves per pack for most of those. Northeast Washington has quite a few packs in there. It's wolves have been establishing in there for quite a few years. The North Cascades, the lookout pack was actually one of our first packs. It was our first pack that we knew of, but the Cascades has been slower to recolonize. I think you have a source population up here. You know, the Northeast Washington has a source population of BC, but also the Rocky Mountain states, because as I'll get to in a little bit, they move quite a bit. But this last year, we did have 3 new packs established, the Shady Pass pack, this, I think, Keller Ridge, Sherman, Dominion, and then one in the Blue Mountains called the Columbia pack. And so this year we've actually got some new information with wolves. We're looking at this Lake Wenatchee area, looking at the Stehekin area up here, and then possibly something going on up in this area south of Loop as well. And so we're constantly looking for new sign, but like I said, we've got 3 wolf biologists and a handful of, or quite a few employees, but it's the population in Washington. So people out recreating that share their video, share their camera images and things like that, that are going to help us find some of these new questions.
I was just wondering, why do you think there's that dead spot by Republic?
In this area?
Yeah.
Ben, please repeat the question.
Oh, so the question was, why do we think there's this dead spot up by Republic, Western Republic? It's an area where it looks good, but then there's quite a bit of open country in there as well. And it's something that we've been looking at. We've had wolf activity move through. We just haven't been able to document a pack in there at the time of year where we need to do it in the winter months. And so we'll be back up there looking again. We've had reports, we've had sign through there, but we've just never been able to document a pack in the winter time using that area for one reason or another. And so we'll keep looking. We did have reports of, I think it's the Aeneas Valley up in there. We've had some reports up in there. The other thing too, I forgot to mention, but we did have a collared wolf last December moved down into the South Cascades. And so it's been hanging out down by this Mount Adams area. And we actually, after the report went out last year, we picked up an uncollared wolf there with it. And so we're going to be looking for that one, and we could have our first pack in the South Cascades. So was there another question? I thought I saw a hand up. But if we break that down, you know, what we need to see is at least 4 successful breeding pairs in each of the recovery zones. So we've definitely met our recovery objectives in Eastern Recovery Region. We've actually, for the last 2 years, we've had 4 successful breeding pairs in the North Cascades. And the total wolves of 163 in the Eastern region in 27 packs, 42 wolves in 6 packs. And in the South Cascades, like I mentioned, we had that one wolf that was collared that crossed I-90 and went down into the Cascades. And we know that there's a second one down there with that one. So hopefully it'll be there December 31st and we'll have our first pack down there. But total right now from our last count, we had 19 successful breeding pairs, 206 wolves and 33 packs. And so that recovery regions are set up in the state so that we look at recovery as a sustainable population over a significant portion of their former range. And so having 15 successful breeding pairs in the Northeast is a good thing for recovery when we're trying to reach recovery goals, because that's where your reproduction is coming from. That's where those animals can disperse to get to those other areas. So if you don't maintain decent populations and a strong population in there, it's going to be harder to get to your recovery goals in the other parts, because that's where those animals are going to come from. And so if we look at our trend over time from 2008 going up, This is just the number of wolves. And so we're up to 206 wolves. It's been a fairly steady climb. During these 2 years, the Confederated Tribes of the Caldwell Reservation wasn't allocating the same money, and they weren't doing their surveys in the same way that we were during those 2 years. So they went back to collaring wolves and doing their camera work and getting counts. And so it was the same this year, but that's why they're a different color for there. But the counts still kind of matched up, even though they were doing surveys different ways. But we just wanted to highlight that. And this is the successful breeding pairs. So you can see the yellow is the North Cascades recovery region, and the purple or blue, I'm colorblind, so whatever that color is the Eastern recovery region. And you can see it's kind of bounced around at a level, but it's not really continuing to climb. So they've hit that saturation point, and really about only 70% of the packs typically will be successful at breeding each year. From looking at the data from the Rocky Mountain recovery states, but you know, we aren't seeing that population where everybody's still breeding. Once they hit a carrying capacity, they're density dependent, so that population kind of plateaus in that area. And so this is where the successful breeding pairs were. We did have the 4 in the North Cascades recovery region, and quite a few here. We just need to see those 4 successful breeding pairs in the South Cascades to reach our recovery goals. And so hopefully with this new couple animals down there, we'll be able to have a pack this year and maybe see some pups in spring in the South Cascades, and we'll be on our way to those recovery goals. We always have mortality each year. So the Confederated Tribes of the Caldwell Reservation and the Spokane Tribe both hunt wolves on their tribal lands. And so we did have 22 harvested this past year. We had 4 vehicle collisions. We had several animals that are under investigation due to mortality that we found, collared animals. And then also we have livestock depredations in the Eastern recovery region where there's no federal protections. We have it built into our wolf plan that if we do have repeated livestock depredations from a certain pack, we can go in and remove a couple of those animals, or start with a animal or maybe 2 in those areas to try and mitigate for those livestock depredations and try and change the behavior of that pack. And so one of the things that it's kind of fun to show is the dispersal behavior of these wolves. And you know, when I get reports, because I get reports all the time from the public and from folks sharing, which I really appreciate because that helps us find new ones. They could be all over, and you'll see them in Seattle, you'll see them. All these reports come from everywhere, but I like to show this. This is the wolf data that we get from the collars from 2009 all the way through 2019. And one of my colleagues, Dr. Lizanne Petraka, she's doing our population viability analysis of wolves based on Washington data, but she put this together. And I'm going to play it so you can watch the timeline go on the top center of the screen. So we're at 2010. So this is a collar of 1 wolf. This is the second wolf. And you can see them go when they disperse. That line goes up where the collar data goes. And so you can see how far into BC, you can see them down in Idaho and Oregon, down over to Montana. To watch where these things go when they disperse is pretty amazing. All the way to Eastern Montana, all the way to Yellowstone. And so these animals, when they pick up and go and disperse, they can cover a lot of distance. And it's just pretty neat. So that's what we're hoping from this area. We're seeing them go into BC, but every once in a while, we've had some in the last couple of years go from the Teanaway Pack all the way to Northeast Washington. And then the one from the Teanaway Pack went over to the Nanum here and then went down into the South Cascades. And so that when they get to 2 or 3 years old, they want to have breeding opportunities. They want to start a new pack and kind of create a life for themselves. I'm a kid from Wisconsin. I ended up in Washington. So I'm one of those long distance dispersers.
Hey, Ben.
Yeah.
We have a question from a person in the audience.
Absolutely.
What is happening to the recovery with the hunts now allowed in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming? Is there any chance of relisting them nationally so those hunts become illegal?
So right now, that's under U.S. Fish and Wildlife to have a federal listing. And so they are U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with that listing. I think they're doing a species status review right now, and I think that'll be out within the next year. And that'll help determine what they do and what direction they go. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of information about which way the the feds are gonna go on that one. I actually had a meeting yesterday, and they were pretty tight-lipped on things, so we don't even get to know or are privy to any of that information, because that's out of my jurisdiction. So, but I bet we'll probably hear something within the next year from that status review, and then they'll determine what they're gonna do. So. All right. So yeah, it's pretty neat to see this dispersal, but when I get a report, even if it's Southwest Washington, knowing how wolves can cross the landscape, I want to go check it out. I want to see the proof. I want to see pictures of tracks, or if they have a picture of the animal. I think wolves could show up just about anywhere. There's deer and elk, and there's prey for them, and a forest or a place to stand. They could be there. So it's pretty cool. If we look at their population over time, you know, we started with a pack of 5 animals in Lookout Pack territory in 2008, and it's just slowly been progressing. So this is the minimum count each year and the number of packs. And so now we're up to 33 packs. We had 19 successful breeding pairs. They've been growing, last year was 16%, but on average, since they started, growing at 25% a year. And so that's not just pups being born, but that also includes immigration into Washington from other areas too. It's not just pups being born, but wolves being able to move across the landscape.
Interesting question, since it started in 2008, were they reintroduced, like, where
They were not.
Please
No.
repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. So the question was, were wolves reintroduced into Washington, like Montana or Idaho? Or actually it wasn't Montana, but Yellowstone. And so, no, in Washington, wolves were not reintroduced. So everything that's in Washington has walked into Washington on its own, or been born here from a pack here in Washington. So that's one thing that makes it a little tougher too to find them, as they're recolonizing new areas. They pop up, but it might take us a little time to actually find these new packs and give reports or go out and find them on the landscape.
were they educated, like, were they, how do they feed on, like, you know, previously, like, what happened?
So what happened to them? So we had wolves, I actually had a history slide in another presentation. I should have thrown that in, but so wolves were trapped. There were about 15,000 wolves trapped and taken to the forts back in the early 1900s, and excuse me. And so, and then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they were hunting them, trapping them, poisoning them. There was a lot of conflict with the European settlement that came in. They had livestock and sheep and livestock, so that was a competition there. And it was just the way of the West, is that, you know, what they wanted to eradicate all the predators off the landscape. And so by the 1930s, they were pretty successful with those bounties and those things. And so we really had a whole gap from the 1930s up until the 90s without seeing wolves in Washington at all. And then kind of late 80s, early 90s, every once in a while you get a wolf that moved down into Washington, you get reports. But we didn't really find our first pack until 2008. Was so about an 80-year gap where we didn't have any wolves.
Another question
Sure.
from Zoom folks, i.e. the camera.
Okay.
206 animals. How many parents did they all come from? How deep is the genetic diversity?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer specifically to that. You know, I can tell you, looking at our genetic data in here, there's great diversity. We've got wolves going to Yellowstone. We've got wolves going 600 miles up into BC. And so they can cover a lot of ground. I'm sure wolves, even though BC doesn't collar wolves and we don't see what comes back this way, but we've got good genetic diversity. We did a study with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service of all the Western states, and we compared the genetic diversity of our wolves and Oregon's wolves, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and compared it with all those. And there's a lot of mixing actually going on and good genetic diversity. We actually saw a higher preponderance of genetic markers from BC. So a lot of our wolves in Washington, we had more from BC than say the other Western states. So I think a lot of our wolves, there's definitely a higher percentage of them compared to other Western states that have those BC markers. So I think that's where a lot of our immigration has come from. So, yeah.
What are the positive benefits to habitat once the wolves have been introduced versus
Yeah, there's some interesting.
Repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. So what are the benefits to the habitat, having wolves on the landscape? And I would, there's a number of things. I think with another carnivore, I mean, in the numbers that wolves are, 206 wolves don't change a ton. When you take a small area like Yellowstone, that's a park, and it's natural prey, there's no livestock grazing, there's no forest management, there's no things like that. It's a lot different landscape than, say, a park setting where there's no manipulation like that to the landscape. And so I think you see things at a different scale on managed lands like we have in Washington. But you do, I mean, wolves, when they're on the landscape, they have the ability, just like we teach a dog to smell cancer cells in us. Like if there's a herd of elk and they're running a herd of elk, they're going to look for the one that they smell an infection, or that they, can see those vulnerabilities in those animals when they're running, or smell those vulnerabilities in those animals, and they're going to be able to take out those. So I do think you get a stronger herd. We haven't seen it with wolves, but with chronic wasting disease that they've seen in other states, just having that in cougars, they were able to demonstrate that the prions going through the gut of a cougar actually reduced it by something like 97%, reduced those prions. So they showed it with coyotes as well. We haven't seen it with wolves, but I can't imagine a cougar coyote would be much different from a wolf. And so it'd be interesting to do that same study, but with the digestive tract of a wolf. So there are some benefits definitely of having wolves on the landscape, just to have a healthier prey population and maybe have a chance of, having an impact on some of those diseases as well. So yeah, there's, but I don't know that we'll see like the difference of what you saw with the beavers and things that they were showing in Yellowstone, more on a managed landscape, and quite that drastic for sure. So was that any other questions here?
I think the one you, I think, have already answered, but are wolves leaving other areas for Washington, or is the total number in the region increasing?
Are they, I guess I'm not understanding the question. Are they coming into Washington, or are they leaving Washington?
Are wolves leaving other areas for Washington?
So are we getting an immigration in? So we are. I think when you have a higher harvest in Idaho or Montana and those places, you have less. Obviously, they're taking that surplus that would normally leave the area and come to places like Washington. So if you have fewer wolves, there's going to be less to immigrate in. But like you see, we've got a pretty good population base now in Washington, and so that's going to provide that recovery, and those wolves will still go. But what's interesting is we just are using the Washington data and did some population modeling, and it showed immigration is pretty important for population persistence. And the modeling work that I did back and published in 2016 showed that immigration is a very important factor in as well to sustain that population and for recovery. So immigration is still important. And so we need some immigration still there. And I think we'll still see that even though there's harvest in Idaho or Montana. I think right now, a lot more of our recovery is coming from wolves established here in Washington because they have those protections. And so I did mention, every year it seems like we have to do a couple removals. If you have questions regarding that, we have a wolf livestock interaction protocol. It was published in 2017. All the things that we look at and to identify recurring depredations and the non-lethals that we want to see producers utilize, so that if they do have chronic issues, if it gets bad enough that we need to go in and do removals, that they're doing the things that they need to do to protect their livestock and protect wolves. And a lot of that's all documented in our wolf conservation management plan, but especially this interaction protocol. And so our wolf livestock interactions from 2008 to 2021. So there's about 1.5 million livestock in Washington that are grazed around private lands or public grazing allotments.
I have a question for you on the livestock stuff.
Sure.
I'm the conservation officer in Alaska.
Okay.
We do the same thing, basically, we get it on military property.
Sure.
And we found out that probably 80% of the wolf kills of livestock was the livestock ranchers' fault, having them in certain areas and not taking precautions on them.
Yeah.
And what I want to find out, does Washington give any kind of reimbursement if a cow is killed? So they're
Right.
bitching about the cows getting killed, and they get no money back.
Right.
You want to repeat the question?
I will, so, yeah, so he was asking, are there compensation programs basically for livestock? And, that a number of the livestock, issues that he came across in Alaska, you know, they, I'm sorry,
They were the ranchers.
The-
Having them in areas.
that the
They
rancher,
told to get them out of the area.
yeah,
Sooner, and they did, and I know there was one of those cases in, property on land management where the guy had set up a lease to graze his cattle. He was
right,
supposed to get him out like in September, he didn't get him out until November, and a couple of his cows were killed. As
right.
far as I'm concerned, the wolf's gonna do what a wolf's gonna do.
Right, so, yeah, and sometimes, you know, is it the rancher's fault sometimes for not getting their livestock out of an area that they should have been off a lease several months before, things like that. And so in Washington, we do run into, issues with that on occasion. But based on the protocol, if they aren't, you know, having non-lethal tools to protect those livestock, that doesn't go down as a ding against that pack, in the sense that if those depredations occur, they won't be counted towards a lethal removal. And, you know, Washington, we put a lot of money towards protecting livestock, through non-lethal measures. We support a range riding program. We have a bunch of conflict specialists that'll help get flattery, which is flagging that can go around calving pastures and smaller pastures. We put out reg boxes, which if we have a collar in the pack, it's a noise device that if a collared wolf comes close, it'll emit sound and light at those. And so we put a lot of tools out there to try and protect livestock, and different situations require different tools. But with 1.5 million livestock in the state, we only had, you know, less than 50 interactions each year over the whole course of the year on each of those years. So you can see each of those years, and that corresponded with a small removal. So this year we had 6 wolves that were removed due to livestock depredations, where we had recurring problems, and that was in maybe two different packs. And so that happens from time to time, but it's really minimal compared to all the Western states. Washington's, you look at the population continuing to grow, but we've got a pretty stable line of livestock depredations through the years. So I feel like those non-lethal tools and the things that we're doing and working with the producers is actually working pretty well in Washington. There's always more to do, and we can always get better at it. But when I look at the statistics of other states, I feel like we're doing a pretty good job of minimizing those depredations. And, you know, we definitely don't want to see livestock killed, and we don't want to have to kill wolves to protect livestock. And so we want to keep both those numbers down. And I'm glad to see that that's fairly stable and not going up with the number of wolves that we have in the state. So, was there another question?
No, we've got about 2 minutes.
Okay, so I got just a couple slides. We do have a lot of research going on. If you're interested in some of that research, there was a commission presentation from the University of Washington students that's saved online from this last week. So check out that commission presentation. And then also there's a video, the Predator Prey Project, which is you can find online on Google. Just Google the Predator Prey Project, and that's another cool video to show some of their cool research going on. If you guys, just tips to coexist with wolves, I always like to leave this, but you know, keep your pets nearby when you're out hiking. Certainly dogs on a leash if you can. Secure food sources. Don't feed deer and elk in your backyard. That leads to problems of carnivores having to come in because those deer are all congregated there. Definitely accompany pets out after dark. Learn how to identify carnivore tracks and sign. And then for folks with livestock, get rid of those carcasses. Get them to a transfer station, a dump, or bury them deep in the ground, because that can be a big attractant and make your other animals vulnerable. And though we haven't really had much issue with people running into wolves, but I do it for bears and cougars as well. If you do come across these animals in Washington, you know, deer stand there and look at us and people don't get worried about it. If a cougar or a wolf or a bear does it, people get really nervous, even though they're all doing the same thing. But there's occasions where, you know, that cat, I have some other cool ones with a cougar presentation that, you know, showed the signs on the face of those animals. These animals are typically, wolves especially, tend to run the other way. But if for some reason one stands its ground, just make yourself look big, aggressive. You know, the one place that it's different is a rendezvous site, because there's pups there and they're gonna protect that rendezvous site. The adults will not protect it, but they're gonna bark at you, tell you this is my space, we got pups here, get out. And they're gonna do that by barking at you or bark howling. And so in that instance, you wanna back out of that area. And that's usually in the summertime, like I said, in June, July, when those pups are stuck at a little rendezvous site or even a den site. So if you are getting barked at, it's probably because there's something there they want to, you know, protect, and you just need to back out of that area and leave them be. So, and if you do come across on your birding adventures or hiking, please report that. There's a spot on Wolf Observation Reports online. You can upload pictures. It really helps us find new packs and new critters out there. So thank you very much. Sorry for all the technical difficulties, but I really appreciate you guys. You have a question?
Are you seeing any benefits or detriments associated with the collared bulls? Are they preyed upon more, higher breeding success, more hit by cars, any of that kind of stuff?
I wish I could decipher that, but without having the uncollared ones collared, it's really tough to say. You know, the thing about wolves is they're social in the wintertime, and certainly they're all traveling together. So one collar doesn't necessarily separate it from the other individuals. They're all still traveling together. You know, Washington has a data sharing program with livestock producers and government officials and things. I think more information is shared and more available to the public, but I don't know that has increased the mortality. I haven't looked at the data enough to know if that's actually increased the data or increased the chance of mortality on those. We haven't seen, I mean, we get call information and we monitor those. But it's supposed to help those producers and folks avoid wolf activity areas. And so it's a small group of folks that get that information. It's supposed to help stop livestock depredations and, you know, not stop, but reduce chances of livestock depredations. So, but yeah, it's tough to say stuff that isn't collared, what the difference is.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.